Hey y'all, welcome into another edition of The Short Show. I'm sure you watched it last week, but we'll just be providing some quick coverage of everything that's gone on this weekend in the USL and hopefully getting some viewer interactivity. But I do want to start out with some plugs. We'll be live at the same time again tomorrow with the usual USL show coverage. Got the whole panel coming on. Uh, Lots of good content, lots of big storylines to be talking about. 2 days from now, 8 a.m., we'll be launching another episode of Kit Season. Make sure you check out the prior episodes of that. Excellent discussion of the visual look of the league, which I think is something that's super fun to think about and is super important to the experience. So that's fun. Thursday night, we'll be back again with another episode of The Short Show. And then we'll be having some really exciting away days content coming up. I don't know if y'all caught the Colorado Springs edition of that. Really good stuff, really exciting that we're doing this and really highlighting the fan experience. But for now, I think I just want to talk about some of the big things that we saw across the weekend. Because of who I am as a human being, I caught every single game, at least in portions. So I'll kind of just break down everything blow by blow. Yeah, Kaylor just pointed out the Loudon game, and that's exactly where I wanted to start. Um, I mean, he's joking in that they're the best team in the league, but at the same time, the way that they've been playing so far has just been utterly impressive. And they got a 3-0 win over New York that, to be honest, was somewhat misleading. New York really outplayed them in the early stages of the match, but that after that red card, Loudon absolutely took it to them. In terms of who really impressed for Loudon United, Sammy Guadiri and Tyler Freeman down that left side were just so impressive in the 3-4-3 shape that Loudon kind of runs with. Guadiri was a Inter Miami player, I believe. They required him midway through the offseason, and he's been dynamite as the left wing back in this side. Just so creative, so technical. Bumps completely far forward on the overlap. And against a New York side that, when they went down a man, ended up pushing a center back really into the midfield, so was numerically short. Guadiri on that left side, paired with the substitute Freeman, was just too much for them to handle. That said, I do think New York has shown some really bright play so far this season. They're the classic kind of MLS2 team in that they're not going to be very good, but they're kind of liable to give you a game at any point in the season. If you think about what they did to Atlanta in the midweek last week, that shows that they're probably a cut above the maybe basement level of this league. And I think they gave Miami a tough game in week one. One player to look out for if you are catching a New York Red Bulls 2 match is Sam Williams. He's 16, 17 years old. Plays the sort of deeper of their kind of central pair in the center midfield. Really good passer. There was a sequence maybe midway through that Loudon match where, I mean, very Anderson Asiadu, like he kind of picks up the ball in the middle off of a tackle, drives forward into the box and finds a teammate for a shot. So New York has some exciting things, but this Loudon team with that high pressure, with their dynamic players, is really going to be a playoff threat in my mind. And my playoff odds that I put out this morning showed that. But the next match I want to hit on was Detroit getting a nice home win. And I think before I get into some of the more technical, tactical sorts of things, it was just super fun to see Keyworth in that stage. I'm going to be honest that I've not really seen a ton of what Detroit is doing. But at the same time, like just having that fan environment, Phil showing off everything that he was seeing in terms of the experience there on Twitter was super cool to see. The train connection with Pittsburgh is obviously super fun, but they really grew into that match. If you think about what happened on the pitch, they run this sort of 3-5-2 shape, 3-4-3 really. And I think a lot of times early on, they just couldn't get anything going in the middle area of the pitch. Maxi Rodriguez was way too deep, and we're getting some San Antonio comments. They'll be familiar with some of the qualities of Maxi Rodriguez's game. But as things went on, they were able to really just push up. Antoine Hopino especially dropped down a lot deeper, helped them to build past a Charleston side that, for all of their offensive struggles, does keep a strong defensive shape and has some really good central defenders. So Detroit bringing those forwards deeper, help them overload, help them build, and really change the face of the match. I'll move on to San Antonio in just a second here, but I do want to say Charleston looked dire in attack. They have absolutely nothing going in terms of build up. I think they only have 2 shots on target total in their 2 games played. Not looking great for the Battery right now. And they have the talent, but it's just not being utilized well. And in terms of San Antonio, that's the next match I'll be hitting on as we go through the weekend chronologically. It was a sort of up and down game for them in that Los Angeles really did hold a pretty strong advantage at the end of the day in terms of shots and shots on target. But it's the quality of chances that matters at the end of the day. And the San Antonio system, with that 3-5-2, with the way that they counterattack, really did look solid. They're a team that I've taken a lot of heat for in terms of doubting them in the offseason and then maybe underrating them so far in this campaign. But I think if you look at what Carter Manley did, for instance, as a central defender, so impressive. If you look at the spark that David Loera was adding in that final third in transition, and Justin Dillon for me was absolutely the man of the match, just driving transition. This team has a way of replacing those key talents. And I know I'm taking some heat for the way that I've compared San Diego versus San Antonio. I just think I believe a little bit less in what San Antonio has done, just with like the injuries to Kekuta Manneh, some of the doubts I have about the way that they've been playing. But at the end of the day, like they're a playoff lock in my mind at this point. And if they can activate their talent, it's really going to be a strong year for them. Next matchup chronologically would be the Memphis game. Memphis really came out with this unexpected kind of 3-4-3 shape. They're using Reese Buckmaster as a center back rather than kind of the fullback midfielder thing that he's often been employed as. Niall Logue has led that back three really well. He's someone who's impressed making the jump from League One last season. But for me, it's that dynamic on the left side with Patrick Segrist and Laurent Kessiedou that looked really strong. And then Aaron Malloy making the jump from League One as well. Had a great game for Memphis. They're a playoff fringe team for me at this point, and I don't know if that system is going to be strong defensively in the same way that San Antonio, with that similar three in the back, really does have the presence in the midfield with PC and Abu. Memphis doesn't have that strong center. I mean, Kessiedou is fantastic as an attacker, but if you're really relying on him in the middle to hold things down, that's not necessarily what you want. And then quick note on the other side of that Memphis game, not believing in Oakland at this point. I've been pretty vocal about my doubts with them so far. And I do think that the performance they got from Ottar Karlsson at striker was solid, but their rotation and defense is bizarre given how strong they were at the end of the year. They're lacking in terms of the spark. I don't see them as much of a contender this year, and I think that's partially why I see San Antonio as such a solid lock at this point. But moving on, Pittsburgh, in a somewhat tight scoreline, really took care of business against Hartford. The way that attacking front just continues to roll every single week is a complete joy to watch. Dane Kelly, as anybody with a brain knew, has been just an excellent pickup for this team. The gravity that he brings in the attacking third opens things up so well for what Russell Cicerone, Alex Dixon try to do. So then you're getting those threats. That's opening up even more space in the wide areas. And you saw it on the first goal for Pittsburgh, where Hartford rather gets so sucked in by those threats that Robbie Dambro can streak down the other wing. They're just a fantastic side. Hartford's 4-1-4-1 did look decent at times. I just don't believe in what they're doing. I didn't love their roster from the start. They're a team that for a couple of years now has relied on this really route one kind of football, no matter who their manager is, when they have one of the best creators in the league in Danny Barrera, really talented guys like Andre Lewis, Connor McGlynn. It just seems like a mismatch over and over again. But yeah, Pittsburgh, the real takeaway there. Boy, next up, we've got that Louisville game, and they dominated Miami. It was a thin scoreline again, 2-0, but they outshot them 16-4. I think the notable trend tactically in this one was the manner in which Louisville kind of switched up their formation. They moved from that back three that they used really well in week one to a four at the back. And I have to shout out Josh Winder at this point. He's 16, 17 years old again. Just another example of how this league has really folded in some of the young talent. And Louisville is just so strong at this point. I would really be afraid of them. And then a quick shout on Miami, who added well in the offseason, but they lost Francois, they lost Forbes, Ariel Martinez. I just don't know if they really improved all that much with the changes they made. Obviously, you have to give it some time with new management and all that. But for me, I think it was a lot of lateral movement. Then just switching over, I talked about Louisville, their Louisville-Indianapolis Proximity Association football contest opponent, Indianapolis, looked very weak. And we have that matchup next weekend, and we'll be getting a really cool away day segment from it. But boy, Indy just doesn't have any fluidity in terms of what Mark Lowry is looking for. They're very poor defensively. If you think about the tenets of what the Mark Lowry system does really well, as we pivot to El Paso in just a minute here, he employs that diamond, which keeps you very narrow in the central midfield. So that relies on the fullbacks getting high, drawing the opponents out, and opening up that space in the middle in the first place. And when you're using Jared Timmer, say, as a fullback, who by nature is a central defender, that just doesn't have that offensive spark. So then the middle is clogged. Well, now Nicky Law, your absolute engine offensively, has to come super deep where he can't create danger. The offense is just not going to get the job done. In terms of the defense, the forwards, think about Aris Briggs, Stefano Pino. These aren't players with a very strong work rate to begin with. So you're losing out on the defensive kind of steel, that frontline pressure that made this team in El Paso under Mark Lowry so hard to break down. And Tampa was clinical. Jake LaCava's looked great, but it's just tough for them so far. But I will hit on that El Paso, New Mexico game now. I've taken a lot of heat from the New Mexico fans who think I'm not quite showing them enough respect. But boy, oh boy, they looked good. I'm getting some shouts in the comments about Nico Brett as well. He has been clinical, as everyone expected, in terms of that New Mexico attack. But I think the way that they approached the match defensively was just really smart. As a baseline, they run a 3-4-3 formation. But I mean, by definition, when you have that four-man line, that's two wide players, two central players, it's a little bit weak in terms of facing a team like an El Paso that uses three players in the center. So what they did was drop Chris Wean deeper down into the midfield when they were on defense. This gave them that numerical equality. It really stilted what El Paso was trying to do when they were building out. And then when the moment struck, those New Mexico fullbacks pushed very, very high up the pitch, closed down on the fullbacks, and created a lot of turnovers. You saw an early chance for Brett off of that. It was just an effective strategy. And El Paso grew into the game for sure. But the way that New Mexico kind of switched up their system was something that you didn't really see under Troy Lesesne a lot in seasons prior. He was fairly doctrinaire in how he approached the games. So I think that fluidity was important. And I do think that in terms of how El Paso approached things, it was notable that Eric Calvillo got the start at that defensive midfield spot over Richie Ryan. I'm on the record adoring Eric Calvillo over and over again, but I think he's stronger in a higher placed position. But you can't just bench Diego Luna for Eric Calvillo. So it's a bit of a struggle for John Hutchinson right now. That said, I love what they're doing in terms of that shape and that Sebastian Velasquez false nine. Emmanuel Sanupe might be one of the best additions of the offseason on the wing. They're going to be okay, and I have them in the playoffs right now. Sticking in with the Mountain Division, though, Colorado Springs is off to a hot start. I believe 2-0 with Orange County and Monterey wins, beating those California opponents. I didn't really know how they were going to line up this season. They added so many talented players. You've got a lot of strikers, you got a lot of central midfielders, but they've sort of gone with this kind of 4-4-2 shape that turns into a 4-2-4 with four insanely good attackers. And going across the line, like Mishi Galina will play on that left wing. Elvis Amo is really leading the line as the furthest forward striker for them. And his presence, his running has been super effective as well. On the right side, Malik Johnson has been there, and he's played further back than what Galina is doing on that other wing. And that leaves, of course, Haji Berry, the defending MVP, the defending Golden Boot winner who got off the schneid on the score sheet this time around, sort of as this like roving number 10 second striker type. I think one of the underrated things about Haji Berry's game was the way that he so often came deep last season. He would pick up the ball pretty far into the midfield and just blast these insane diagonals to Deshane Beckford over the top. He'd carry it on his own into the final third and draw fouls. He's really effective, and having a partner like Elvis Amo with that gravity opens up so much more space for him. So that's what they're doing offensively, but then that front four matches up against any back line numerically and facilitates what was already the most aggressive press in the USL last season. So the way that this team added and reworked their tactics just fits the style so well. And we got a comment pointing out that Berry is not going to score as many goals this season. I think that's right, and that's totally by design. It's really a smart decision by Burke, who's the manager in Colorado Springs. It just activates what this team does so well in so many ways. And I could praise a million other aspects of what they're doing. But just quickly hitting on Monterey on the other side, I'm really low on what they've been doing so far. They've tried their darndest to build out of the back in a possessive style. Kai Green especially really has some of the talent to do that. But at the same time, they've just not shown any capability of really being able to pass. And those turnovers were why they went down 4-0 to Phoenix. They created so many chances for Colorado Springs where they'd pick up the ball in dangerous areas and then just find Mishi Galina on those runs against the back line. There were moments where they really looked strong in build-up. Vasiljevic would drop down deeper to pick up possession, or Grant Robinson would kind of pop up on these overlapping runs that they could find with long balls. But it's just lacking in terms of working the ball to the middle of the pitch where you can create the most danger. So that's my worry with Monterey right now. The next matchup would be that Birmingham-Tulsa game, close to my co-host Taylor or Kaylor's heart there. Yeah, he's popping in real quick. But and I think he's rightly pointing out in his discussions of the game how Birmingham was very solid in that second half and grew into the game. But it was those initial stages where Tulsa came on very strong in their 4-4-2 shape, and Petar Kuic was unbelievable in the central midfield in that context. In terms of what he did shielding that back line, working with their central defenders, but those long balls he was playing over the top pinned Birmingham back and forced them to just restart their build-up cycle over and over again, which can kill the momentum of an attack, especially early on in a game where you sort of have to get adjusted to things. So he was really impressive for me. And then those two center backs who I hinted at, Adrian Diz and then Ronald Rodriguez. Two new additions, a Salvadoran international and a fringe all-league player from RGV, looking really, really good. And shout out to Brian Brown as well up top. I know I kind of slandered him a lot, but he's looked very solid. He has a good ability to hold up possession and let players like Rivas, Rodrigo da Costa get involved. But Birmingham, for me, was at their most dangerous when they really were able to overload the center midfield. I know I had talked about this as a strength in terms of what Tulsa did initially, but by virtue of the fact that Rodrigo da Costa doesn't really play defense as a 10 and likes to be more of a striker, there was a natural gap. And you saw those inside forwards in the 3-4-3 that Birmingham was playing. Think about your Enzo Martinez, your Prosper Kasim. They would come a little bit lower. And then the high positioning that Harivo and Anderson Asiadu were taking early on ended up coming a bit deeper as well. So it let them build through the middle. It let them really effectively attack. Were they unlucky not to get the results? I don't know about that because Tulsa was just so strong at the back. And I think their approach changed because they started off so well. But at the same time, I don't think this was a worrying match for Birmingham. I think it's just something that you end up seeing during the course of the season. Moving on, we've got 3 more West Coast games to wrap things up. And I think I'll start with Orange County. I believe I saw Andy in the comments, and I just want to say that I think Orange County looked very solid this week. They are running with a 3 at the back system this season. And I think it looks solid for them. I was doubting a lot about the move away from the 4-2-3-1 that won them the championship. But the recognition that things had to change with Ronaldo Damas out the door, with some of those presences of like a Robert Kiernan leaving, and the way they've adjusted within that framework has been super effective. Kobe Henry, especially the youngin in that back line, has been good. They're still lacking in terms of how they build through the middle of the pitch. And I think that's where the lack of Eric Calvillo is a huge deal. At the same time, that central trio has been a revelation for this team defensively. And I think it's the core of why they've been so strong. I'm on the record absolutely loving Kevin Partita since his Reno days and before that. I think he's an excellent player. Peterson's been good, Tony Rocha as well. But it's that flexibility of having 3 men in the middle where you'd often see one of these really trio of holding midfielders pop high up the pitch and support against build up wide. They would drop down deep and really shield that back trio. It was a very fluid defensive system that was completely contrary to what this Orange County team did in terms of their super solid, stagnant defense last season. But it worked well enough to get this result. They're lacking the offensive spark. Cubo Torres is still a question mark for me in terms of that production. But if you're going to get a brace out of Sean Coley, that's going to be some good stuff. And I saw some references to the 98th minute goal there. It's just a messy season so far in terms of the matches being ugly. That we're going to hit on the red cards tomorrow on the USL show, I'm sure. But there's just been a lot of havoc and chaos pretty much across the board. And this was no exception. 2 more big games, and I think Vegas is going to be the one I hit right now. They came out and kind of dominated against Phoenix. And I do think that some of the shot numbers and the XG kind of belie the fact that Phoenix was much stronger in terms of the possession and the territory battle. They were still in the offensive zone for a long stretch of time, but they struggled to break down what this Vegas team was doing. Vegas, much like Orange County, relied on this trio of central midfielders who moved as a really fluid, compact unit to close down on any and everybody. And the Rising couldn't get good chances against it. And kudos to Vegas in pretty much every respect. I broke down their approach to the game in the USL Tactics Show segment this week, but Martin Bjorschel at right back was a complete revelation. He shut down Santi Moar in every facet of the game, and the support he got from that central trio was so good. So between those 2 factors defensively, this team would win the ball. They would find Danny Trejo in transition. He was someone I was talking about all offseason as a real impact player, as an impact young player who was going to take the step up. And between the goal and assist he got, I think he showed why he's one of the top talents in this league. For Phoenix, I'm not overly worried just because of the talent they have. And the way that Arturo Rodriguez has been playing so far has really been right. But at the same time, I think the lack of a striker since Rufat Dadashov left, the loss of Solomon Asante, the loss of John Baquero in the midfield, that's three real threats that haven't been replaced in a comparable way. And you've lost some of the gravity that so pulled teams out of position and let Santi Moar become such a threat. So this Phoenix roster is still super talented in the attack, and I think they're going to be fine after a stretch there. But they've been sloppy in defense, and I think there are some real holes in this team that has me thinking they might not be that dominant title threat that we're used to. And Harry pointed out in the comments that the issues are going to come in the playoffs. I really could see them not even like getting a top 2 or 3 seed and kind of being in the solidly in the playoff mix, but not one of those home field advantage dominant sides that we're used to. But just to wrap up, I do want to hit on that San Diego Sacramento game between really two of my top teams in the Western Conference. I know I've taken a little bit of heat for the love for San Diego just in comparison to that week 1 performance against Los Angeles. In some ways, I think the scoreline was misleading there. They looked really, really strong in that game. And I'm such a believer in the way that they've adapted their tactical system this season. They were the most possessive team in the USL last year. They always built from the back, and they did it on the ground. And they've added a whole new dimension to the way that they play their attacking soccer this year, and that's through Kyle Vassell at striker. I have it on pretty good word that he's the most expensive player in the league at this point. And boy, you can sort of see why. His physicality, the athletic presence he brings in terms of the runs he makes, the dominance he has against opposing center backs, opens up long balls that San Diego never would have been able to play in the past. So when you're getting that and he's winning these balls against opponents who aren't quite in form, and you're having the speed, the clever dribbling of Tumi Mushobane running off of that, the absolute guile and creativity of Alejandro Guido sort of being complementary to it, that's a complete threat. Meanwhile, this team is running with, again, that 3 at the back possessive system that morphs into a back 4 when they're fully in defense. They lost 2 center backs to international due to an injury and were completely fine. They've run out with like 5 different players in the back line across 2 games, and they've looked really solid. And you can credit the central midfield for that. You can credit Nick Moon tracking back, but some of their central defenders are just excellent so far. And then one more shout here before I wrap it up and maybe respond to some comments if anybody has some hot takes to provide. But Sacramento, I know I rated them super highly, had them basically in my top 3 coming into the season. And I don't doubt that they're still going to be a good team. That 3-1 win against El Paso, I think, says more than the 2-0 scoreline against San Diego. They've done a good job of targeting Douglas Martinez in transitional moments. Rodrigo Lopez, who obviously has played as a central midfield for most of his career, basically has played as a right winger or a striker so far because of the needs of this team with injuries and visa issues. Lee Desmond has been impressive at the back. They're still working things out, but I think those early results have really combined to show me that this is still going to be a strong Sacramento Republic side and one that is going to be near the top of that Western table come the end of the year. And then Harry has a good question here about, is El Paso actually good? If you think about the midfield and the forward line, I'm absolutely buying into the fact that El Paso is really, really good. It's that 4-3 that I was discussing earlier, where whether it's Covio or Ryan at the holder spot, you've got someone solid. And you've got someone crucially who frees up Luna and Mares to do their thing with those other 2 midfield spots. So then you've got them running at opponents. That opens up Cristiano Francois and Emmanuel Sinupe, who's a Tottenham product, on those wings. They're so dynamic. You've got Sebastian Velasquez as this false nine striker who can find either of those wingers on the overlap. So I believe in what they're doing up the pitch. At the back, I'm a lot less sold. They've got that Basque central defender, Egaluz. They've got Martin Paris. Two new additions who seem okay enough on paper, but I don't know. I have question marks about that. Evan Newton hasn't looked the strongest in goal either, but he was sort of a late addition to this team, maybe getting into form. I'm biased as someone who is an Indy 11 fan at heart, so I naturally believe in him. Get the good koi shout out from Ryan there in terms of Sanupe. I am taking a little bit of heat there also for ranking El Paso above San Antonio. For me, they feel pretty much like they're in a similar tier mentally. And I think the next time I push out rankings 2 weeks from now, I wouldn't be surprised to see San Antonio as one of the bigger risers. I think I just need to see a little bit more proof of concept because at the end of the day, like they got pretty severely outshot by LA. And yes, a lot of that is systematic with San Antonio because, as I was mentioning, they got the better chances. But I still just need to see the solidity hold on for another week or two. Good question from Andy about when do we start worrying about the Roots. I've been worrying about the Roots for a couple of months now. I didn't love their offseason. As I mentioned, I am really questioning what they're doing in terms of their defense right now. If you think about the core of what they did that made them successful down the stretch, they had Paul Blanchett in goal, and they ran with Kai Green and Emra Clementa at the center back spots. Well, Green left for Monterrey, whatever. You've got Danny Barbier, you've got Alberto Fuenmayor, and you've returned Tarek Morad. Those should be 3 really good options at center back to replace the presence of Green. At the same time, they've kind of just rotated all willy-nilly at the center back spot for no good reason. Paul Blanchett hasn't seen a minute so far this season in favor of really bizarre choices at the goalkeeper spot. So you've taken this solid core that let them play so well down the stretch and kind of just abandoned it. At the fullback spots, Memo Diaz and Akeem Ward were completely brilliant on the overlap, got back so well in those playoff games. And then you're not starting both of them in your week 2 game against Memphis, and a Memphis team that is so focused on the wide areas. I completely adore Juan Guerra as a coach, and I think he's going to be a good manager for a long time at this level. But the decisions that this team has made so far really have me flummoxed. And so I'll give it a minute for any other thoughts, questions, topics, but I do think I'll be wrapping up in just a second here. Once again, want to plug the live USL show tomorrow, same 9:00 start time. And again, that kit season show that we've got launching Wednesday morning is going to be fantastic. We'll do another short show on Thursday, hitting a lot of Wednesday action this week, which is always exciting. In particular, I would keep my eyes on that Tulsa-San Diego game. They're 2 of the teams that I think have been very strong so far. And it's a good chance to prove my power rankings to be wrong. So that should be something that the commenters enjoy. But yeah, I think I will wrap at this point. Thank you all for joining in, and I will see you next time.
Thank you for watching another episode of the USL Show. This and every episode is brought to you by the Beautiful Game Network. Find podcasts and other written work at bgn.fm. Once again, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you guys again next week.